All right, so thank you all so much for joining us today. I would like to welcome you to the very first edition of the FreeFuse Sessions. This is our opportunity to share some information and some great insights from thought leaders in various spaces, from future of work to engagement through learning or through any of the verticals that we have touched upon with FreeFuse. And we just want to be able to share this really great opportunity to provide folks who have some really fantastic insights, a voice and a platform so that we can just deliver value all across the ecosystem that is FreeFuse. So today, our very first guest is a future of work aficionado, a futurist, self-described. And SJ is honestly a fantastic person, one of the great people in this whole concept of new year, new you. So I do want to give SJ the opportunity to please introduce yourself and tell our audience a little bit more about you.
Well, thank you so much for the kind invitation to be guest number one, Mike, and it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to do what I believe is super important in the marketplace, and that is serve, solve, and share. So a few thoughts or a few little backstory nuggets about me for your audience, for your listeners. First, I went through the conventional school system as it was, like the vast majority of people. And I have lived in the state of Ohio in United States and America my whole life. And it didn't come until much later in life that I realized that the system I went through, the system that all my friends went through, my other family members, and then later on my professional contacts, was a system that was aged and was no longer going to be able to serve the vast majority of its clientele as we move forward. So originally, I started my entrepreneurial journey like a good number of people, Mike, and I started off as a side gigger hustler. And I was testing some stuff out in the marketplace and also making sure that the shift was not so sudden, like going cold turkey with smoking, that I couldn't downshift or upshift or whatever I needed to do. So it took me a little over 3 years before I felt like I had hit the inflection point. And a little over 8 years ago, I went off on my own 100%. And to this very day, I remain that way. And over the years, the model that I've followed has morphed with the times because we've been through a pretty major global disruption in these last 8 years. And as that happened and as other things were continuing to develop, I adapted myself and was being as agile as I could. So the present day, it is known, my brand, my value proposition is known as the Education Sherpa. The Education Sherpa says that I am a guide. I don't have all the answers, but I can light the way for you, and we can learn together if I don't know everything myself, which I promise you, I am constantly learning as a lifelong learning advocate. So in the B2B space, absolutely future of work. I believe the future of education feeds the future of work, and the future of work feeds the future of education. So it's a virtuous cycle. And as part of that, for B2B, for business to business, I offer 3 highly customizable solutions that I want to offer and deliver to as many business people, whether they are one-person shops like me, or whether they are larger enterprises or anything in the middle, to help with where we are presently and where I see us going over the next 5 to 10 years.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that really great introduction to what you do. And, first of all, love the name, love the analogy of the Sherpa. I think that is a term that not enough people use. I've always loved the word, and I always love that it is a guide, right? And like any good guide, I feel like you have perhaps your own, of course, your own perspective on the future that I think is actually quite unique. And I would like to, obviously kind of pick your brain here about what you see as major trends that are part of future of work or the way that we consume information that perhaps no one else is, right? Like, what is it about the Sherpa of what you do that allows, this unique perspective?
Well, it's informed, Mike, by my own story to a degree. Because the first thing is I believe that education should be highly tailored to the person's why, to the person's how they best work and how they best are educated, their learning style, their social style, their temperament. And then I also believe that we can still, to some degree, scale this kind of delivery in the marketplace without it being too bulky or difficult to reach organizations that have 50 people, 250 people, 1,000 people, etc. Okay. So I don't think you have to do a major opportunity cost trade-off here. So that's the first thing, because some people might say, well, this system of using credentials, through the accredited university system, the collegiate system, so-called higher ed, that's very duplicatable, right, SJ? Well, to some degree it is. Well, what about this K-12 system that precedes it? Is that duplicatable? Well, certainly. In the state of Ohio, where I live, there's 612 public districts, right? So yes, there's to some degree it can be scaled and replicated. But at what cost? This is where I think not enough people are asking this question. What is the cost of delivering things at scale where you are almost completely ignoring people's natural inherent gift sets, their natural skills, their proclivities, their preferences, their tendencies? And also, the general economy is changing at a much rapid fire way than it was when these two back-to-back conveyor belts were introduced. Okay, the economy moves a little faster than it did in the 1890s, moves a little faster in the 1940s, moves a little faster in the 1980s or 90s when the internet was just starting to go mainstream in the 90s. So I now ask, as a part of the future of work, fed by future education, why aren't we backing up root cause and addressing and transforming and reshaping these systems rather than just saying the status quo can serve the 2025 era just like it did in the past? So I think that would be the best way I can answer and frame your question.
Absolutely. And talking as somebody who taught students myself, right? What you're talking about has always fascinated me. There's this aspect of we've utilized a lot of the same tactics from, you mentioned 1890. I would almost say like there's things that we even use from like early oratory, from like Roman times, or however long that goes. Maybe it's even beyond that. But I find it so fascinating that there are certain elements of like what we've kept over the years. And the part that really struck me about what you said is really the part about there's an opportunity cost, or at least a cost, as it pertains to mass distribution of information, right? And now we're just saying everybody is standardized in what we're trying to help that they learn. Here are proficiency tests, here are SATs, here are all of these things. And yet that's not really actually utilizing the unique gifts that certain people have. There's certain people who are much more creative, hands-on, work better with collaborations. There's some people who are kind of like the mercenaries, like they're individuals. They like to work on things lone wolf status, and they'll get it done, but they really just can't be around groups. And I've always, as someone who actually taught students for a long time and just kind of understood those behaviors, I've seen that so often, or saw it so often when I was doing that there was just this challenge of how do you actually reach the most people and still kind of allow them to be who they are as a unique person and accentuate those particular gifts. And it was always just something that I always tried to infuse into what we did as teaching, which was really just kind of infusing different parts of personality of like what the teaching would be, and trying to like get them to engage in a whole new way. That was really like something that was really top of mind for me. So I have to say, I really, echo that sentiment, because I feel like that's where we're really losing out on a lot of even just engagement and buy-in from the students, or the audience of whoever that learning is going to.
Agree. I believe that true organic education has 4 E's to it. And this is where it is distinguished between what I believe are 2 other approaches. And I think far too many people take all 3 and they conflate them together. And this is another sort of like part 2 of my answer to the earlier question, as well as addressing your own story, Mike, is there is a difference, I truly believe it, between schooling someone and educating them, and then even splitting the hair further between credentializing them, turning them into a credentialist, and actually educating them. Okay. So I believe they're all 3 separate things. So I believe that those 3 separate things hinge on upwards of 15 gaps that I identified over roughly a decade of studying the history of where we came from. Okay. And where we came from has a lot of different turning points or inflections. You mentioned a couple, Mike. I mentioned a couple myself, and there are certainly others throughout the last couple millennia, right? But these 15 gaps that I identified, obviously a subjective number, but I'll just hit for your audience a couple of them because I think it adds a little more color to this part of the conversation. Is in no particular order, one of the ones that we're missing big time on, we swing and a miss, and that's why our system is underperforming so badly, is we swing and a miss on transferable life people skills. So important, yet it's not baked into the curriculum and the programming and such to any great extent, and that's a big loss for the clients, constituents that are served by these 2 legacy systems. Another is we don't give enough attention to entrepreneurship and the value system and the outlook that it offers. Okay. Plenty of focus on working in governmental entities, plenty of focus on working in further and staying in academia, plenty of focus on working in the more corporate-y world, working for some third party of some size, but not nearly enough focus on that 4th pathway, which is entrepreneurial. Then the 3rd and last I'll focus on of the 15 is, and you already hit it and so did I, so I'll add a little bit more to it. We'll call this the cherry on the sundae, is that personality, social style. Teachers, instructors, assistants, professors, whatever kind of title you have in academia, if you don't know the personality, style, the temperament of your students, whether they are 5 years old or whether they're 45 years old, and they don't know yours, you're going to have some serious ships passing in the night. Okay. And that is a huge gap as well. So those are 3 of the 15.
And that insight, so, I really appreciate that insight for a few reasons. Of course, entrepreneurship, near and dear to my heart, right? Being the founder of, FreeFuse myself, and, understanding kind of the creative thinking, and equally as much the execution aspect of entrepreneurship is really such an important thing that I feel like isn't really formally taught as much. Like, yeah, you can take an entrepreneurship class, but it's just not as fleshed out. And I also think that a lot of people don't realize that entrepreneurship actually takes many forms. That doesn't mean that you have to necessarily build your own business. And, there's been the term thrown around intrapreneur, right? Like within a business, you might come up with a whole new initiative. And I think that maybe just chunking that up to just being able to not only just apply your thinking in a new creative way, but actually being able to execute, I feel like is kind of the high level skill set that's provided there. And I think it's one of the things that allows you to kind of problem solve and think in this whole new sort of way that provides you with an opportunity to take a step back, look at what doesn't exist, find the gaps there, and really help solve the problems of other people. And I think that as a principle and a guiding way that we look at things, it's actually one of the most important skills that I feel like we should learn. And yet it's not as focused upon as I feel like other things are. Like, I mean, I don't know. I was an engineer for a long time. I don't really remember the last time I used calculus, right? Like, so some of those things, not to say that calculus isn't great for other things like modeling and things like that, but that's kind of what I've seen in my own environment. And that's why, when I go back to, Texas A&M, where I actually went to school, I really enjoy doing the entrepreneurship talks because you'll always get a real interesting combination of folks from all different walks of life, right? And that's what I think is the real cool unifying thing, is that it's a uplifting sort of principle that we can all learn. It's not just condensed to people who know business. It's not just people who can build products like coders. It's this multidisciplinary collaborative thing to truly build something, whether it's a company, a new initiative, new department. And I think people just need to enjoy that a lot more.
They do. I learned this a number of years ago by attending an in-person, nowadays, of course, especially since the COVID era, the word webinar became even more in use and as a delivery vehicle, right? But I guess we would call this just an in-person seminar, I guess we call it. But what you just described reminded me of that, because this is probably in maybe 2014-ish, somewhere around there. So it was a little before I went off on my own. I went to a seminar, and the one gentleman that was speaking there said something that I've never forgotten, Mike. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said there's a big difference between an occupation and a vocation. An occupation is hearkening back to the Latin occupare, which means to take up space and time. A vocation is reflective of the Latin root of vocar, which means to be called. I believe most careers, and that term is so used so heavily everywhere you look and listen to and such and write. I believe the word career is not as important as calling is. We should be teaching through customized journeys in education. We should be teaching callings, because callings align with those 4 E's that I made brief reference to earlier, and now we'll finish off by adding the rest of it. So the 4 E's are positive energy, encouragement, edification, to edify others, and empowerment. And there is where I think you get that cross-section that you experience at Texas A&M, is people, I truly believe the vast majority of people desire 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of those things. And schooling and credentialism oftentimes lead people to careers, and they lead them to occupations which take up space and time, but they don't have that aspect of calling, and they're often missing 1, 2, 3 again, or all 4 of those E's.
And I'd like to add on to what you said in regards to kind of like this customized journey. When I look at something like a video game, what's one of the hallmarks of like a really good kind of laddering up experience, right? Like they have a really good like onboarding, so to speak, right? They get you into this world, this sandbox, and they deliver to you kind of almost like a checklist of things sometimes, or maybe they deliver to you kind of an initial tutorial experience about how this game is going to go. But they let you explore and find out about the world kind of in your own, at least like, games, a lot of these games these days, they let you explore in a way that allows you to find out more about how the game works and how the world works in that realm. Without you necessarily having it spelled out, right? You don't necessarily have to have this person tell you exactly everything that's going on. You can explore. And I feel like when you provide people with guidance and, their own pathways, I think that that's what really can be special about allowing people to find information that they can freely just go and explore and choose at their own behest to move into and understand more context around. It's kind of like, one of the cool things about what we do on our end is like allowing people to kind of structure these different pathways and kind of create these different scenarios, you see a lot of this creativity about, okay, this is where I think that this particular pathway can be structured, but getting that information about where people are automatically exploring on their own is so interesting. It's such an interesting aspect of how people can go and explore the world around them. And I think that we have, going back to how people are teaching folks in school,
Right.
everybody seems to walk the same path, right? And again, like, we're not really giving them that freedom to go and explore on their own. Instead we're like, hey, everybody walk the same path. But in reality, that's kind of silly, because if you think about it, most people, like almost everybody's going to have their own journey. So why not figure out ways to best give them an opportunity to find the right path to explore? And I feel like, that's kind of why I feel like people got really into like gamification, even in like, education. But I feel like there was kind of a fundamental misunderstanding of what made games actually, kind of valuable in terms of allowing people to, sort of explore the world around them and learn through that particular interface, right? So,
Mhm.
to your point, I think that there's just a lot more customization and a lot more, things that can be done in that realm. Um, so in terms of this system you've put together,
Mhm.
how can people apply some of these ideas for their own, sort of future of work initiatives, or learning practices? Do you have like actionable steps that somebody can maybe perhaps take today? What's like something they can do maybe as like a first step to kind of getting them started out?
Great question. So if we're in the business landscape, the workplace, a lot of different possibilities here. The first is if you have some trepidation about making this kind of transformation, because this is going to require a little bit of time. You have to do what Toffler taught us back in the 80s. You have to be able to unlearn and relearn. And he used some mildly strong language and said that you're illiterate if you can't do this, right? So that's a little strong, but sometimes you got to be metaphorically, hit upside the head, right? Because the same old way is that warm embrace of the status quo, Mike, but how far will that get you in a 2023 environment? Okay. So one possible actionable step, if you have that trepidation, is to do a little beta trial. Okay. Maybe let's just come up with a quick and dirty example. Let's say you have a workplace of 50 people. Okay. You could take 10% of them, maybe take 5 people, or if 10 people, 20%, and you can run them through a little beta. Okay. And in the beta, here's a couple possibilities you might do. First, you might say that number one, we are going to look at you 5 or 10 people, as folks we would like to mentor and see your professional development skyrocket. Therefore, we are going to look at you as that trial beta group, and the more professional development that you complete, podcasts, webinars, seminars, reading books, being part of professional organizations that are encouraging lifelong learning, that will be the equivalent of like tokens or like little digital credentials, that we can, badging that we can use as a part of seeing you get ahead in this workplace. Okay.
Mm.
So that's one pretty major actionable step. Another is you drop all the pretenses that everyone has to be in one particular location at a particular time.
Mm.
Okay. Okay. So there's been all kinds of talk the last 18 or so months, Mike, about RTO this and RTO that and hybrid this and hybrid that. But I think what we're missing is the fact that bouncing back to where we were in very early 20 is something that a lot of people yearn for, but they didn't yearn for the things that they really weren't bought into. And I don't think a lot of people are bought into, I have to be in place X from time A to time B. Okay. It's affecting my mental health. It's affecting my family life. It's affecting my financial picture. It's impacting my ability to be social and be a social creature, right? So all these things are being impacted, and that's the opportunity cost because of the same old way we've been doing it since, the 1950s or so, when we all got back from World War II, right? You know,
Yeah.
so, the suburbanization of the country really started back then, right? We had done the urbanization prior, and then it became suburbanization, right? So it's like that era is now over. You can now work from pretty much anywhere with a decent, solid internet connection, a place to put your body, and the amount of nutrition and the shelter that you need to do those things, right? So that's the second thing you can do, is loosen that grip or just let it go completely, right? And then a third thing you can do is you can start to learn about all the many future trends. I'm tracking about 12 of them pretty closely right now. Some of those 12 will affect your workplace. Some of them may not, but be aware of them so you're not blindsided by them when they come up and impact your bottom line, as a workplace, as a company. So those would be 3 actionable steps: is lean into the future, customize the approach for your staff, and have lifelong learning be the center instead of credentialization.
Yeah, and what's really interesting that I feel like we spend a lot of time like providing credentials because it's like the compliance element of it, but I also feel like it's almost like there are ways to share this information in a less I don't want to say it's a less formal way, but I want to say there's ways to package it in a way that I feel like could be a lot more appealing. And I feel like when we ask someone to get credentialed, well, it's like any training. Like I remember when I would, obviously when I worked at like other spots, whether it was like Texas A&M or like, other companies, you go through trainings, right? And most of the people are like, okay, let me just get through this, take the quizzes, move out of this, and we're good to go. I don't have to do this anymore. And look, there's a certain sense of certain trainings, you kind of are going to need to figure that out, like information security, of course, at the highest realm of trying to obviously make sure your information is safe. Everyone should be trained by that. But can we guarantee that people actually care? I can't guarantee that, right? So I do absolutely agree. And I think that kind of builds into this credential, moving away from credentialing folks. And I just feel like there is just a missed opportunity here to almost integrate this game type of structure, like you said, even at an organizational level, right? Like allowing people to almost level up and giving those incentives and sort of making that actionable. And I feel like a lot of that is because people just don't really know where to begin, right? It's kind of like this, even if you were to look it up, you wouldn't even, people who are uneducated about it don't really know what to do. So they'll spend a lot of time like kind of spinning the wheels. Oh, I'll do it next week. Oh, I'll do it next month. But then, and then they're like, oh, well, it was good enough as it was. And now you're not leaning into the future, like you said, right? So I feel like it's kind of something that we ourselves have tried to like be conscious of, is how can we help people feel like they're getting less credentialed, or even utilizing our tools. We have completion rates, but we really focus more on what are the interactions between people, and how can our platform actually facilitate more natural interactions, more kind of a way for people to feel like they're in this sort of game like atmosphere,
Yeah.
and allow them to really feel like they're participating in the experience. And I feel like when you actually engage folks in that unique way, that's where the real power is. What are your thoughts on that?
The vast majority of humanity has played some sort of game at some point in their life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's athletics, whether it's if you're old like me, you've played board games.
Like board games today.
You know, yeah, they're still out there, and I'm glad they are. Video games. games of chance, like lately, I'm not making a stance on this, but is in the news, is sports betting is becoming more and more common in states. My
Hmm.
home state, it just became available and all kinds of deals were struck, right? So that's games of chance, right?
Mm.
And I guess the fifth option would be just simple recreation games, right? Hey, I'm going to go play softball and I'm not scoring the game, but it's something to do, right? Um, so right there alone, you have all of these examples all around us. Yet, when it comes to the environment of what most people call education, but usually it's schooling or credentialism, it's almost as if that delivery method, that pathway is impervious to all of these other examples. Then we start talking in hushed terms, and you can almost sense the dissatisfaction, the venom in some cases draining out of people, the energy as well is work.
Mm.
Okay. You use it as a negative instead of as a positive. Oh, I gotta go to work. I gotta make the donuts. Okay. It's because we don't have an engaging atmosphere. How many times do we have to rerun the Gallup and Barna studies showing that people are disengaged or actively disengaged with wherever they are working? How many times do we have to do it before these workplaces wake up, stop the cognitive dissonance, stop the denial, stop the excuses and the blame, and they say we have to do something very, very different? And it's not about the inmates running the asylum or anything like that. You got to drop your fear impulse, drop your desire to be in control, and share the control with the people who have earned it. They're working for you and they're probably making you some pretty good money, right? So how about making it an engaging environment for them, right? Bring a little gamification to it, right? It's not about wasting time, because here's the thing. This is not the factory age anymore where we should be measuring the vast majority of people. There's some exceptions, right? But we shouldn't be measuring the vast majority of people by piecework.
Mm.
Okay. Piecework is time-based. Okay. 8 hours a day, you must put 17 car doors on, or you are not going to be able to work here again, or something like
Mm.
that. Some punitive stick mentality instead of the carrot, right? It's about competency. It's about value creation and addition, or even multiplication, division, geometric, exponential, whatever way you want to slice it on the mathematical side, right? It's value added to the workplace. It's competencies leveraged to help the workplace be a place that attracts new clients and customers. It's not about time-based measurement anymore. That is so archaic that I think I'm going to call Dino the dinosaur, and I'm going to ask him. I'm going to ask him to be your official mascot of your office, unless you drop this focus on 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, same old tired thing that we've been doing forever and a day. Okay, it worked for Henry Ford in 1908, roughly, when that was the distinguishing thing, because a lot of his competitors were 6 and 7 days a week. And he said, I'm going to offer a 40-hour work week in 5 days. Okay. That was great in 1908, but this is 2023. So it's 115 years later. I think it's time to move on. So there you go.
Yeah, I love that. And it's funny. I feel like perhaps in the time before, this COVID times, right, where people are like working from home all the time. I feel like there's like, almost kind of two schools of thought. It's like, yeah, you need to be there 40 hours a week, but now we have even more measures to try and track you. Or now it's actually, that people feel like they have all of this freedom. So now they're just like, even if they have to work 40 hours a week, quote unquote, they're doing it on the beach. They're doing it like out in,
Okay.
other places. And I find that development to be most fascinating. I actually met a guy a little while back. His name's Kyle Blaylock. Shout out to Kyle. He does actually end up hearing this. But he had been talking about how a lot of folks are actually kind of like moving around. They're like the digital nomad folks who are every 3 months move to another spot. Another 3 months they move to another spot. And I think that element is honestly fascinating, because it's like, okay, cool, you're in different cities, here and there, and you're kind of like, in a sense, gaming the system, right? Well, if we're doing remote work, I have to be here for quote unquote 40 hours. Well, I'll enjoy 20 or 30 of those out on the beach somewhere, and as long as I get my work done. And you know what it is I think that there is a certain level of, obviously, like measuring somebody to, reaching their objectives and goals. I think that's something I learned recently was called the impeccable agreement, which was like, actually talking with somebody and saying, hey, look, what do you think can feasibly get done with this? Let's assign a directly responsible individual. Let's actually get the buy-in from everybody to say, I can be accountable at this time. And there's less of, you need to do this, and more of a almost kind of like an agreement that we can have to say, this is what I think can feasibly get done. If I do more than this, then obviously I'm happy to do so and happy to go beyond what I think I can do here. But there's at least this understanding of, where is it that we think that we can, what we can accomplish. And then equally as much, like, if we fall below it, let's not just blame the person. Let's understand what was, actually in play that caused that to happen. And I feel like, there's not as much of that sometimes, especially like for, an organization like ourselves, which is, more like earlier stage. But I feel like if people took the time to understand the context behind why something has happened, that would lead a lot more towards building a much more happy and healthy environment, and something that could really get the buy-in, that could add on top of this gamification. And maybe that is gamification. You add that into there. So, I feel like all of those sentiments are incredibly important. But I know we're coming up to time here, so I did want to give you an opportunity to actually share a little bit more. If you have a little bit of a call to action that you'd like to share with our audience, would love to give you the floor and give you an opportunity to do so.
I appreciate that. I'm going to add one more little nugget, and then I will transition into that.
Absolutely.
I just thought of it based upon what you were saying. It might be more of a stage 2 or 3. And again, all that stuff is highly subjective. That's why I believe what all of my offerings, my solutions under the Sherpa umbrella is, I want them to be all highly customized, right? But 2 things that you might want to look at too is number 1 is do some research, folks, on what is a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization. Okay. Secondly, you might want to do some research on a holacracy. Vortex and Zappos are 2 of the most well-known organizations that followed that pathway. So those are 2 you can also look at as well. And these are the kind of things I live for, because I get such great joy out of being the Sherpa. So, all right. So now let's talk about that wonderful acronym of CTA. So people like me who aspire and desire and do my very best to live up to being a thought leader, we don't want to just leave it as pure thought. We want to be able to see that potential energy turn into kinetic energy through taking action. The action is not about being perfect, because I'm sure most of you folks have heard this before, let alone you, Mike, is perfection is often, if not always, the enemy of progress. So it's not about getting it 100% right. It's just saying that the status quo is just not the answer anymore. And did people want to get back to normalcy after 2.5, 3 years of disruption? Absolutely they did. But they did not want to trade off some of the good for it has to be exactly as it was in January 2020. You know what I'm saying? So the first call to action is, like most professional service providers, I have a digital calendar and scheduler. So I will provide that to you, Mike, and I would appreciate you posting that and wherever you share this so people can schedule some time. I have all kinds of time increments. If you're just looking for a very quick meet and greet and you already heard enough about me and it's like, hey, I just want to ask one or two quick things, 15 minutes, right? That's a call to action. Or if you really want to dive in deep and really pick the brain even beyond what Mike already did with me today, folks, I even have a 90-minute example, right? A 90-minute time block. So that's the first call to action. It's just, let's talk. Let's get to know each other, right? Second is I am a huge LinkedIn advocate. LinkedIn this year turns 20 years old. And I still think there'll be other LinkedIn disruptors. There's a couple out there that I'm aware of, but right now it still is pretty solid as a B2B tool. So please connect with me on LinkedIn. Please mention if you can to help me out that you heard or watched me or both through FreeFuse here. I would really appreciate that so I can get a sense of where the connection request or the follow is coming from. And then three, on my LinkedIn and my feature section, I have all sorts of links to past podcasts and other such thought leadership content. I would certainly be very grateful if you'd be willing to listen to those, subscribe to the podcast host and hostesses, leave some feedback for them, share them around. That's an action to take too, and it has multiple benefits. So those would be my base level calls to action, is to take some steps forward. And I really appreciate whatever you choose to do. And I trust that you're going to have a future of work and education centric 2023.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, SJ. This has been a fantastic first edition of the FreeFuse Sessions. We'd like to just thank anybody out there listening, checking this out on all of the different channels. Of course, we'll have some promo clips that you can check out over the coming week or so. So please reach out to SJ if you had an opportunity and really love what he shared here. So thank you so much. We will see you in the next edition of the FreeFuse Sessions. Thank you so much and have a great day.